Silence is supposed to be your power move, right? You step back, go quiet, and wait for the shift. The phone buzzes with their message. The realization of your worth finally dawns on them, and they start chasing what they thought they could ignore. That's the fantasy we cling to. But then reality hits, and you're met with something much harder to swallow. Nothing. No response, no reaction, just the unsettling stillness of their indifference. Instead of them noticing your absence, it feels like you're fading even further into the background. That emptiness can be brutal. You start questioning yourself. Why isn't this working? Am I not good enough? Did I do something wrong? It's as if your silence has turned into a mirror, forcing you to confront fears and insecurities you'd rather ignore. And let's be honest, those fears are loud, aren't they? They whisper lies like, you're forgettable, you're replaceable, you never mattered. But here's the truth. Their lack of reaction doesn't define you. It never did. What it does is shine a light on a deeper truth. Silence, when misunderstood and misused, is powerless. Today we're diving into the heart of something so many of you have asked about. Why isn't your silence working, and how do you turn the tables? Stick with me, because by the end of this, you won't just understand why silence might be failing. You'll know exactly how to transform it into something that reflects your strength, your growth, and your worth. Let me break it to you straight. Silence isn't a magic spell. It's not some universal law that guarantees someone will notice or miss you. Silence on its own is just empty space, and if that silence is rooted in longing, in expectation, in waiting for them to react, it carries no weight. They feel that energy. People can sense when your silence is really just noise wrapped in quiet. That kind of silence doesn't make them notice, it makes them indifferent. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's where the real power of silence lies. Not in their reaction, but in your ability to reclaim your energy and direct it inward. Silence isn't about them, it's about you. It's about creating space not for them to reflect, but for you to grow. Think of it like planting a seed. If the soil isn't fertile, if there's no sunlight or water, that seed will never grow. Silence is the same. Without the right intention, the right environment, and the right action, it remains dormant. But when you nurture it, when you pair your silence with purposeful growth, it becomes something transformative. Here's the truth you might not want to hear. Sometimes they don't notice your silence because they never truly valued your presence. That's a hard pill to swallow, but it's also liberating because it means their reaction isn't about you. It's about them, their priorities, their distractions, their inability to see what's right in front of them. Your worth isn't tied to their ability to notice you. It's tied to the life you're building, the person you're becoming, and the strength you're cultivating in the quiet. If this resonates with you, here's what I want you to remember. My silence isn't empty. It's the beginning of my transformation. Write that down. Say it out loud. Drop it in the comments as a reminder to yourself and to others who need to hear it. Because silence isn't the end, it's the start of something bigger. Stay tight, because we're about to break it all down. Coming up next, we'll explore why silence without purpose is powerless and how you can turn yours into the most undeniable force in your life. Let's make it happen. Number 1. Silence without purpose is just noise. Silence without purpose is like yelling into a canyon with no echo. You throw everything into it, your frustration, your pain, your longing, and wait for the sound to come back, but nothing does. The effort feels wasted, the quiet becomes unbearable, and you start asking yourself, why isn't this working? Isn't silence supposed to be powerful? Here's the truth. Silence, when done without purpose or intent, is just noise that no one hears. It's a hollow gesture, empty of meaning and impact. And yet so many people treat silence as a one-size-fits-all solution. They think stepping back, pulling away and going quiet is enough to make someone notice. But silence on its own doesn't work. It's not the act of going silent that's powerful. It's the energy, the intention, and the growth behind it that gives it meaning. Let's break this down. Why does silence often feel ineffective? Because for most people, it's not really silence. It's a waiting game. You're not pulling back to reflect or grow. You're pulling back with the expectation that they'll notice, reach out, or chase you. That kind of silence isn't grounded in strength. It's rooted in fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear that your worth depends on their reaction. And when that reaction doesn't come, the fear grows louder, doesn't it? Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Let's sit with that for a moment. Silence only works when it's paired with intention and focus, when it's about you, not them. If your silence is filled with thoughts like, "Why haven't they noticed yet?" or "Are they even thinking about me?" then it's not silence, it's noise. And the more you tie your self-worth to their response, the louder that noise becomes. Here's the lie you've been sold: that silence alone is enough to make someone miss you, regret their choices, or realize your value. But silence is just a tool, and like any tool, its effectiveness depends on how you use it. Imagine trying to hammer a nail into the wall without any force behind it. That's what silence without purpose looks like. It's an empty action, visible but meaningless. Think about yelling into a canyon. The first time you shout, you might expect an echo, but when it doesn't come, what do? You shout louder, hoping that maybe this time the sound will bounce back. And when it doesn't, you feel defeated, as though the silence itself is mocking you. That's what happens when you use silence without understanding its purpose. It's effort without impact, hope without grounding, and ultimately, it leaves you feeling powerless. So how do you break this cycle? By redefining what silence is supposed to be. Silence isn't about waiting for them to react. It's about creating space for growth and self-discovery. It's about stepping back not to make them notice, but to give yourself room to breathe, heal, and rebuild. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine planting a seed in barren soil. If you don't water it, nurture it, or expose it to sunlight, it won't grow. Silence works the same way. If you don't pair it with action, with purposeful growth and inner transformation, it remains dormant. But when you use silence as a time to cultivate your inner world, that's when it becomes powerful. That's when it starts to make an impact, not because of what it demands from others, but because of what it reflects within you. This isn't easy. Growth never is. It's much easier to sit in the quiet and hope someone else will fill the space. It's much easier to wait for a reaction than to face yourself and do the work. But here's the truth. The silence that feels uncomfortable, the silence that forces you to confront your fears and insecurities, that's the silence that transforms you. That's the silence that changes everything. You might think, but what if they never notice my silence? And here's the answer. It doesn't matter, because silence isn't about them, it's about you. It's about building a life so full, so vibrant, that their absence doesn't leave a void. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to shout into a canyon because you've learned to find strength in the quiet. Here's the beauty of this shift. When you stop waiting for their reaction and start focusing on your own growth, everything changes. Your silence gains depth, not because it demands attention, but because it reflects your transformation. It stops being about absence and starts being about presence, your presence in your own life. Here's your affirmation for today. My silence is not empty, it is alive with purpose, growth, and strength. Write it down, say it out loud, drop it in the comments as a declaration to yourself and the world around you. Let it be your reminder that your worth isn't tied to anyone's reaction, it's tied to the life you're creating. And here's what's coming next. We're going to dive into the trap of expectation, why silence fails when it's rooted in waiting, and how to shift your mindset to one of genuine detachment. Because the moment you stop expecting, the moment you let go, that's when everything starts to align. Stay tight. We're just getting started. Number 2. The trap of expectation. Silence often feels like a strategy, a move in the emotional chess game. You pull back, go quiet, and wait for them to notice you. Imagine them scrolling through their phone, suddenly hit with the realization of what they've lost. But then nothing happens. Days turn into weeks, and still there's no response. That's when frustration kicks in. Why isn't this working? Don't they care? The silence, which was supposed to feel empowering, begins to feel like a weight, dragging you deeper into doubt. Here's the hard truth. Silence fails when it's rooted in expectation. When you sit back and wait for their reaction, you're handing over all your power. It's like sitting by the phone, staring at the screen, hoping it will ring. That kind of waiting is passive, powerless, and honestly exhausting. You're stuck in a cycle of anticipation, each moment hinging on whether or not they'll make the next move. And when they don't, that expectation turns into disappointment, which feeds self-doubt, leaving you feeling weaker than before. Let's break this down. Why does expectation make silence fail? Because it ties your self-worth to their reaction. It creates a mental narrative that says, if they respond, I'm valuable. If they don't, I'm not. That's a dangerous trap to fall into. And here's the kicker. They can feel it. People sense when your silence is loaded with hope and longing, and instead of drawing them closer, it pushes them further away. Why? Because desperation, even when it's wrapped in quiet, is still desperation. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Let that sink in. You can't control whether or not they'll notice your silence, but you can control the energy behind it. If your silence is fueled by expectation, it's like a rope tying you to their actions. Every time you think, why haven't they reached out? Or, do they even miss me? You tighten that knot, and the tighter it gets, the harder it becomes to detach. Now, let's use a metaphor. Think of yourself sitting in a dark room, staring at a phone. You're waiting for it to light up, for the notification to pop up, for the sound of that text, but the room stays dark, the phone stays silent. That's what expectation does. It traps you in the waiting, in the hoping, in the longing. And here's the thing. Even if the phone eventually rings, the time you spent sitting there, stagnant and powerless, is time you'll never get back. So how do you break free? By shifting your focus inward and detaching from the outcome. Silence isn't supposed to be a waiting game. It's supposed to be a time of growth. Instead of asking, when will they notice me? Start asking, what can I build in this silence? Redirect your energy toward yourself, your goals, your passions, your inner peace. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop tying your worth to their actions. It means you take the rope that's been keeping you tethered to their response and you cut it, freeing yourself to move in your own direction. It's not easy. Nothing about growth ever is. But detachment is where the shift happens. It's where silence transforms from something you use to manipulate others into something you use to empower yourself. Imagine this. Instead of sitting by the phone, you get up, leave the dark room, step outside, and start creating something new. You hit the gym and feel your strength returning. You reconnect with a hobby that lights you up. You spend time with people who remind you of your worth. You're no longer waiting for a call because you've found something far more important, your own momentum. And here's the beauty of detachment. When you stop expecting, you start thriving. Your silence gains a new energy, one that reflects your growth rather than your longing. It becomes unshakable, not because it demands attention, but because it no longer needs it. That's the kind of silence people feel, not the quiet of waiting, but the quiet of someone who's too busy building themselves to notice who's watching. Here's your affirmation for today. I release the need for their reaction and focus on my own growth. Write it down, say it out loud, drop it in the comments as a reminder to yourself and anyone else who needs to hear it. Let it be a declaration that your power lies within, not in their response. Stay tight, because next we're diving into a crucial question. Are you truly silent, or is your energy still chasing them? We'll uncover how to align your silence with genuine detachment, making it the most powerful statement you'll ever make. Let's keep going. Number 4, silence as a tool, not a weapon. Silence is often misunderstood. Too many people wield it like a weapon, a way to manipulate or control someone else's emotions. You step back, go quiet, and expect the other person to bend, to miss you, to chase after what they think they've lost. But here's the truth. Silence, when used that way, is fragile. It's transparent, rooted in desperation, and they can sense it. Real silence isn't a weapon, it's a tool for self-respect, inner peace, and personal growth. And when you use it for those reasons, it becomes unshakable. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. That's the essence of true silence. It's not about controlling their reaction. It's about controlling your energy. It's about stepping back, not to provoke them, but to center yourself. When silence reflects your growth, not your longing, it carries a power that doesn't need to demand attention. It naturally commands it. Here's where most people get it wrong. They use silence as a strategy to force someone else to feel something, to miss them, to regret their choices. But when silence comes from a place of wanting a reaction, it loses its weight. It becomes shallow, brittle, and easy to ignore. And when they don't react the way you hoped, that silence turns into frustration, self-doubt, and a spiral of overthinking. That's not peace. That's chaos disguised as quiet. Let's reframe what silence is supposed to be. It's not a message to them, it's a message to yourself. It's saying, I value my energy enough to step back. I respect myself enough to stop giving to someone who isn't giving back. It's not about creating absence in their life. It's about creating space in your own, space to grow, to heal, to rediscover who you are without the noise of their presence clouding your mind. Think of silence as a mirror. If it reflects strength, confidence, and self-assurance, it speaks volumes. But if it reflects longing, insecurity, or a need for validation, it shatters under the weight of expectation. The power of silence doesn't lie in their reaction, it lies in your transformation. When you let it become a tool for growth, it becomes more than just quiet. It becomes a statement. So how do you use silence as a tool? By pairing it with action. Work on yourself, not to prove anything to them, but to build a life that fulfills you. Focus on your health, your passions, your goals. Build a version of yourself that no longer waits for someone else to notice. When your silence is rooted in self-respect, it radiates confidence. It becomes magnetic, not because you're trying to draw anyone in, but because people are naturally drawn to strength. Here's your affirmation for today. My silence is not a weapon, it's a reflection of my strength and self-respect. Write it down, say it out loud, drop it in the comments to remind yourself and inspire others. Let it be a declaration that your silence isn't about them, it's about you. And stay tuned, because next, we're diving into why some people don't notice your silence and how to turn that realization into an opportunity for growth. Let's keep building. Number 5, why they don't feel your absence. If they don't feel your absence, it's like a punch to the gut. You went quiet, you pulled back, and yet there's no sign that they've even noticed. No call, no message, no shift. That silence you hoped would make an impact feels like it's been swallowed by a void, leaving you questioning your worth. But here's the harsh reality. Sometimes they don't notice because they didn't truly value your presence in the first place. And while that truth is painful, it's also freeing because it gives you the opportunity to stop waiting and start transforming. Think about sunlight. We bask in its warmth every day, but how often do we stop to appreciate it? Rarely, if ever. It's only when the sun sets and darkness takes over that we realize just how much it shaped our world. But here's the key. If your presence was dim, if you were overly giving, constantly available, or undervaluing yourself, they may not feel that loss when you pull away. Your silence becomes easy to overlook because your light wasn't shining brightly enough to leave an impression. That doesn't mean you're not valuable. It doesn't mean you're not worthy of being missed. What it means is that your presence wasn't rooted in strength. Maybe you gave too much of yourself, always bending over backward to meet their needs. Maybe you were so eager to be seen, heard, or validated that you lost sight of your own value. And when someone takes your presence for granted, your absence won't hit the way you'd hoped. But here's the beauty of this realization. You have the power to change it. If they don't feel your absence, the solution isn't to scream louder, to try harder, or to break your silence just to remind them of what they've lost. The solution is to focus on becoming someone whose absence is undeniable, not because of games or manipulation, but because of the person you're becoming. Start by asking yourself, am I living a life that feels full, vibrant, and grounded? If the answer is no, that's where your work begins. Redirect the energy you've been wasting on their reaction and use it to light up your own life. Pursue passions you've set aside, build skills that excite you, strengthen your relationships with people who truly value you. Create a presence that radiates confidence, independence, and self-respect. When you do, your absence becomes something they can't ignore. Not because you forced it, but because the transformation is real. Imagine two types of people who pull away. One leaves quietly, hoping to be missed, but their presence was so unremarkable that their silence barely registered. The other steps back after building a life so full of purpose and growth that their absence leaves a void, a noticeable shift like the chill of the air when the sun sets. Which one are you becoming? Here's your affirmation for today. I choose to become someone whose presence is undeniable and whose absence is deeply felt. Write it down, say it out loud, drop it in the comments as a declaration of your commitment to growth. And stick with me, because next we're talking about how to take this transformation even further, how to turn silence and growth into a magnetic energy that naturally commands attention. Let's keep building. Number 6, flip the script. Stop waiting and start building. Silence, when paired with waiting, becomes a prison. You step back, hold your breath, and watch the clock tick, hoping for some sign, some gesture that they've noticed your absence. But nothing happens. The validation you're waiting for doesn't come, and the longer you wait, the more powerless you feel. Here's the truth you need to hear. Silence without action is like a seed left unplanted. It has potential, but without care, nurturing, and intention, it will never grow. This is where most people get stuck. They confuse silence with passivity. They think stepping back is enough, that if they wait long enough, someone will notice, someone will reach out. But waiting is not the same as growing. When your silence is tied to their validation, you're still giving them power. You're still holding your breath, stuck in limbo, waiting for a response that may never come. That's not strength, that's stagnation. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. You can't control whether they notice your silence, but you can control how you use it. Silence isn't about pausing your life until they decide you're worth their attention. It's about creating space to rebuild, to grow, and to shift the focus from them back to you. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine holding a seed in your hand. That seed has everything it needs to grow into something incredible. A tree, a flower, something that changes the landscape around it. But if you just leave it sitting there, untouched, it won't do anything. It won't sprout. It won't thrive. It'll remain dormant, full of potential, but completely wasted. Silence is that seed. If you don't pair it with purposeful action, it's just empty time. But when you plant it, water it, and care for it, it grows into something powerful, something undeniable. So how do you plant that seed? By redirecting the energy you're wasting on waiting and pouring it into yourself. Use this time to take purposeful action. Hit the gym, not to prove anything to them, but to rediscover your strength. Learn a new skill you've always wanted to master. Dive into a passion that lights you up. Reconnect with friends who remind you of your worth. Build a life so full and vibrant that their absence stops feeling like a void. This isn't about distractions, it's about transformation. When you stop waiting and start building, everything changes. You shift from being reactive to being proactive. Your silence stops being tied to their response and starts being a reflection of your growth. That kind of silence doesn't demand attention, it earns respect. Here's your affirmation for today. I stop waiting for validation and start building the life I deserve. Write it down, say it out loud, drop it in the comments as a reminder that your power lies in your actions, not their reactions. And stay tight, because next we're diving into how this shift in focus creates an energy they can't ignore. Your silence is just the beginning. Let's turn it into something extraordinary. Number 7. The energy shift they can't ignore. Your silence becomes impossible to ignore when it stops being about them and starts being about you. This is the shift that changes everything. Not because you're trying to force a reaction, but because your energy begins to speak louder than any words or actions ever could. When you focus on personal transformation, your silence no longer reflects neediness or longing. It reflects strength, confidence, and independence. And that kind of energy is magnetic. Imagine a river carving its way through stone. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, and it doesn't rush. It flows steadily and purposefully, shaping everything in its path over time. That's the kind of transformation you're building. Quiet, consistent, and undeniable. The river doesn't need anyone to validate its strength. It simply moves, and the landscape adjusts. When you grow, when you focus on becoming stronger, wiser, and more self-assured, your energy shifts in a way they can't help but feel. It's no longer about making them notice. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to be noticed to feel whole. Here's the problem most people face. They step into silence expecting it to do all the work. They think pulling back is enough, but silence on its own doesn't create impact. What you do in that silence is what makes all the difference. If your silence is paired with waiting, overthinking, or hoping for their reaction, it's hollow. It whispers insecurity, and people sense that. But when your silence is paired with action and growth, it becomes undeniable. It stops being a plea and starts being a statement. So how do you create that energy shift? First, focus on radiating self-assurance. This isn't about pretending not to care or putting on a front. It's about genuinely building a life that feels fulfilling and purposeful. Work on your goals, not as a distraction, but as a path to becoming the person you've always wanted to be. Hit the gym, not to prove anything, but to feel your own strength. Dive into passions that excite you and reconnect with friends who remind you of your worth. These aren't surface-level changes. They're the foundation of a stronger, more grounded you. Second, embrace independence. Stop waiting for their validation. Stop hoping for their attention. The moment you release the need for their reaction, your energy shifts. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. It means you trust that your value isn't tied to whether or not they notice your silence. It's tied to the life you're building, the person you're becoming, and the peace you're cultivating. Here's the beauty of this shift. When your silence reflects strength, they feel it. It's not about being loud or dramatic. It's about letting your transformation speak for itself. Like the river carving its path, your growth becomes undeniable over time. They'll sense the change, not because you're trying to make them, but because true strength is impossible to overlook. Here's your affirmation for today. I don't chase, I grow. My transformation speaks louder than words. Write it down, say it out loud, drop it in the comments as a reminder of the power you hold within. And stay tight, because next we'll explore what happens when you stop playing their game entirely and reclaim your freedom. This is where the real shift begins. Let's keep building. Number 8. When you stop playing their game. When your silence is tied to their actions, you're still playing their game. You might think you've taken control by stepping back, but if every quiet moment is filled with waiting, hoping, or wondering what their next move will be, the truth is, they still hold the power. That kind of silence isn't freedom, it's a trap. It keeps you tethered, reacting to their moves like a puppet on strings. And the longer you stay tied to their reactions, the harder it becomes to step into the strength and independence you deserve. Imagine a puppet show. Every movement, every action, every decision is dictated by the pull of a string. That's what reactive silence looks like. Your silence isn't rooted in strength, but in an attempt to provoke, to manipulate, or to wait for their approval. It's not about growth, it's about reaction. But what happens when you cut those strings? The puppet falls. Yes, but you, the person holding the strings, step into freedom. True silence begins the moment you stop letting someone else dictate your peace. As Marcus Aurelius might remind us, you can't control them, but you can control how you rise above this. That's the key. Breaking free from reactive silence means reclaiming your power, not by waiting for them to notice your absence, but by realizing you don't need their recognition to move forward. Your silence shouldn't hinge on their response. It should reflect your own self-respect and growth. Ask yourself, why am I silent? Is it because I'm waiting for them to notice, or because I'm creating space for myself? Be honest, because the answer to that question will tell you everything you need to know. If your silence is tied to their reaction, you're still playing the game, whether you realize it or not. But when you choose silence for you, when it comes from a place of strength and self-assurance, the game stops. You step off their board and start building your own. Here's the truth. Reactive silence keeps you stuck. It keeps you checking your phone, replaying past conversations, and wondering if they're thinking about you. It's exhausting, and worst of all, it keeps you from focusing on the one thing that actually matters, your growth. But when you stop reacting, When you stop waiting for their next move, you take all that energy and turn it inward. That's where the shift happens. Start creating a life that fulfills you, not to get their attention, but because you deserve it. Focus on your goals, your passions, your peace. Build a version of yourself that is so grounded, so full of purpose, that their response, or lack of it, becomes irrelevant. When your silence reflects your strength, not your desperation, it becomes magnetic. People are drawn to that kind of self-assured energy, not because you're trying to draw them in, but because strength is undeniable. Here's your affirmation for today. I cut the strings and reclaim my freedom. My silence reflects my strength, not their actions. Write it down, say it out loud, drop it in the comments as a reminder to yourself and others that your power isn't tied to them. It's always been within you. So folks, silence is not about forcing someone to feel your absence. It's about creating the space to make yourself whole. Like a tree standing tall, its roots deep and unshakable, you don't need to announce your strength. Your growth speaks for itself. Be that tree, grounded, resilient, and steady, no matter the storm. Remember this: I let go of what I can't control and grow into someone undeniable. Write it down, drop it in the comments as your declaration of strength. If this message resonated, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ready to reclaim their power. Let's keep building together.